Hot summer Sunday. You know, what's been ringing in my head the last few days is a very old song by Loving Spoonful. I don't know if any of you know about that. You may all be so young you don't know about Summer in the City. Hot town, summer in the city, been down. Isn't it a pity? Doesn't seem to be a shadow in the city. All around, people looking half dead, walking on the sidewalk hotter than a match head. That was written really in this neighborhood 50, 60 years ago. Hot town, summer in the city. You know, this is what I love about New York City, actually, are the extremes of weather that we get. So I wanted to say that just to thank you for coming here today on such a day. Stopping for a while. Just stopping. To sit, cool down, relatively speaking, cool down, and kind of allow yourself to partake of the wholeness of life, not just the little narrowness of our own views, but to open our hearts and minds to the wholeness of all of life. You know, it feels like it's such a volatile time in this country and in the world. You know, thinking of my own personal concerns against the great injustice that I see, the violence that's everywhere. And of course, nowadays most of us are so in tune with the media that very little time goes by without our being aware, hyper aware of what's the suffering and violence in the world. And I think most of us feel a kind of painful responsibility, a desire to change things, to make a difference. Here in our hot city, and in this country, and in this world that we live in at this time. But if we widen our perspective a little bit, we recognize that such has been the conditions in the world always. It's not unique to 2016 that there is suffering, injustice, violence. The three treasures, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and the three poisons are greed, anger, and ignorance that comes from the Buddhist teachings 400 or 500 years before the Common Era. Greed, anger, and ignorance. The Buddhist teaching is that that's part of our human existence. But we can't help but want to make a difference. We can't help but want to change things. And because of that, we can feel a little helpless. You know, I think all of us, you know, if we're reading or listening or following the news in, you know, just in the last few weeks in Orlando, Baton Rouge, Minneapolis, Dallas, Nice, what can we do about that? How can we be in the world like that? And you know, that's just what we see in the news. We don't see Bangladesh, Yemen, Baghdad, Uganda, Bolivia, Argentina, Colombia. Immigrants who refuse passage, racism, sexism, homophobia. Greed, anger, and ignorance in the whole world. So, I'm setting you up to find out, how can the Dharma serve us when we are aware of these conditions that we live under? And when we're aware that, you know, we bear some responsibility simply by the fact that we're alive. Now, we're part of it. We can't just say, oh, no, I'm a holy one, and this isn't because I benefit from all that is happening in the world, the economic and social structures of the world. So it's natural to want to avert our eyes, to not look at the suffering, but actually we have no choice, because we are an element in it. We must look. How can I serve as an ally for those for whom poverty and injustice are the main elements of their lives? The Buddhist tradition and the Zen tradition values the role of the Bodhisattva. You know, just by showing up today in the midst of this heat wave, you've agreed to take time to consider who you are and where you are in this life. And that is the very beginning of the life of a Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva means awakening being. Bodhi, awaken, it comes from light, enlightening. That's why the translations of enlightenment come from Bodhi, which is the light that one feels when one becomes connected to our integral singular self and our relational self that's part of everything. We become enlightening. And when we connect with others, we are serving as an awakening being. And sattva just means being, so bodhisattvas has that quality of awakening, lightness. And that relationality, by definition, includes the element of compassion, the element of wisdom, as a way to meet the suffering in the world. Because of that, the Bodhisattva is always associated with a kind of courage. So the courage of the Bodhisattva in an overwhelmingly complex and frightening world. Even if we're baby bodhisattvas, what can we learn? What can we do? How can we serve? So, this is all by way of a way to introduce what I have found a very helpful and traditional Buddhist method of approaching the Bodhisattva's work. It's called the Four Methods of a Bodhisattva. They derive from early Buddhist sutras. First time we see it is in a Pali Sutra, the Sigalovanta Sutra, and in Mahayana Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra. So these four methods came from very early teachings. And when you read about the times, the times that Shakyamuni Buddha was said to have lived, and the times 300 or 400 years later when the Mahayana Sutras arose, they were very violent, difficult times filled with poverty and class warfare. So in the 13th century, the Zen monk and philosopher Dogen took what had been in the Pali Sutras and in the Vimalakirti Sutras and rewrote them for the Zen tradition. And that's the text I'm using today from his formulation. The four methods are freely giving, kind speech, beneficial action, and identity action. And all of these are seen as deriving from our interdependence, from our interconnection with everything. Not just our friends, but those we perceive to be other. Nothing is left out. One of the reasons people come to the Village Zendo is to experience this sense of interdependence. We can lead such isolated lives in this city and anywhere, really. Just me and my needs and blah, blah. And that's why to come to a Sangha, to a community, to chant with others, to use your voice along with other voices, to sit facing the wall, along shoulder to shoulder with other people, is a way of remembering that we are part of something vast, not only spatially but through time, that we are part of the greater whole. And that helps us to allow that rigid definition of the self, which we think ends at the end of our skin, and allow that to slip away and recognize that the self is greater than this skin bag that we live in. So the first method is to freely give. That energy of letting go, not grasping me, mine, but freely giving. And Dogen emphasizes in his piece that it's not the size or importance of the gift. It's not about what you give. It's the energy of giving. It's that energy. He urges us to be mindful of every opportunity to give. It can be nothing. I mean, I think it was yesterday or the day before. Oh God, I was on a subway. It was like I got into this car down here, and there was like no one in the car, right? And by the time we hit Midtown, it was like this, and there was no room to breathe there at all. And there was a woman with a little boy, and you know, I always think, well, I'm old, I get to sit down. But there was this woman with this little boy, and nobody were letting her sit down. And so I stood up and had her sit down. It was like nothing. I mean, the me, my, mine, which all of us have, is just, you know, so pervasive. But just the energy of doing that, it just kind of made my day. Just that silly energy of standing up and giving somebody something that they could have. So to really remember that it's not about what you can give. It's about giving. And to have that energy about you as you move through the day, that energy of giving. So he says, even when you give a particle of dust, you should rejoice in your own act, because you correctly transmit the merit of all Buddhas and practice an act of a Bodhisattva. So even a particle of dust, even just a good thought about someone. Just think, right now, just for a moment, think about what it feels like to give. That energy when we're moved to just offer. You know, the chest kind of expands. And the face softens. When we are moved to give, we are given to. We may not realize it, but we're given. So, at this time when there's so many urgent needs, we can give. We can give a little money or encouragement. We give our old clothes and our books, giving our time. We give our time. So many needy issues in the world. Give our time. Spare change. Just a little. Helps. You give a quarter, somebody else gives a quarter. It's almost enough for a cup of coffee. A smile. Just give a smile. So I urge you to, you must be inundated as I am by requests from community groups. You can do one of them, just to see how it feels. Do some research, make sure it's one that is in alignment with your values, and just give. So the second method that Dogen recommends is kind speech. And we know that speech is really the source of so much violence in the world. But it also can create harmony, can make a difference, can change things, the way we speak. And I know that sometimes it can feel difficult to stand up and express one's views. It's almost we don't know how to disagree without becoming angry and spiteful. It's like we haven't learned to do that. Dogen says we should speak with the feeling of compassion for living beings. Think of them as babies, he says. When we speak to others, think of them as babies. And when I look at the online world and the comments that people give, There's a lot of babies screaming out there who need their diapers changed for sure. Such heat and hysteria online intensifies this kind of quality of feeling about violence and hostility. And yet, on the other hand, speech can be such a supporting way to connect to others. And those of people that we know that are close to us that are being affected by the homophobic and the racist and against the women, gender issues, hurtful speech that's going on in the world all the time, we can say something else, offer a different kind of kind speech. A woman just commented to me that how moved she was the other day when a coworker reached out to her and said, "Oh, after what's going on in Baton Rouge in Minneapolis, I want you to know how sad I am about this and how you must feel particularly affected by it." And another person told me about a neighbor that he hardly knew that reached out after Orlando just to say how much he wanted to offer support. So kind speech can be on a grand scale, where you write an essay and have it published. And it can also be just your neighbor, just someone you meet on the street, offering a soft face and compassionate speech. I just read a really interesting article the other day where the philosopher Dennett, you may be familiar with him, wrote some really helpful guidelines for what I think is kind speech. And he says to do this when you disagree with someone. And we know what it's like to disagree with someone politically these days. He says, first of all, listen carefully to what the person says. You know, and that's often the first thing we do, we go off. We hear one word and we go off and we think we know what the person is saying. We're not listening. Listen to what the person says and be able to say it back to them clearly. This is what I heard you say. And then say what points you agree on. Yes, things are difficult now. Whatever points that you agree with the person on. And then tell the person what you learned from what they said. Is that wild? I mean, you're disagreeing with them and you're going to tell them what you learned from what they said. And only then do you offer your rebuttal. What a difference. Listen to what the person says. Be able to say it back to them clearly. Say what points you agree on. Tell them what you learned from what they said, and then offer your rebuttal. So I think that that's kind speech. Dogen didn't say it, Dennett did, but it seems it works for me. Because I can tend to get kind of volatile too fast. And it's very helpful to have a structure to hang kind speech on. So consider how it might change the way you meet someone who has a different political view, and how you might change the discourse into something of understanding and restraint, and kindness. So Dogen says, kind speech arises out of a loving mind, and the seed of a loving mind is compassion. And so often the other, the political other, becomes someone we have no compassion for, which just raises the temperature for all of us. So the third quality of a bodhisattva is action, helpful conduct. You know, and that doesn't have to be grand. It can be just what's needed in the very moment, without any kind of self-aggrandizing, I am doing this for you, but just a simple action, appropriate action. You know, to speak up when someone's targeted. You don't have to start a fight, but you can speak up when you see someone being targeted because of their skin color or their gender, their ethnicity, their class, whatever makes them targeted as an other. To change that energy at work or in the subway, on the street, in stores, with friends, that's helpful conduct. Is to stop some action that creates another and creates suffering in others. And it can be as grand as demonstrating, going on a march, or as humble as, you know, smiling at a grouchy, crying baby. Or helping an older person who's struggling up the subway stairs. It becomes a habit, this helpful conduct. It's just something you do, you don't think about it. And Dogen said helpful conduct is the whole of the Dharma. So he settled on that as the wholeness of the Dharma. What you do, what your actions are. He said, if we realize this state of mind, helpful conduct will be enacted even in the grass, in the wind, and the water. In everything that we do, we can offer ourselves. And this is what empowers you and gives you courage to make important changes, to affect people, to be of use, compassionate action. And then the final one, the fourth one, is kind of funny. It's the way it's translated as identity action, you know, and people want to translate it as cooperation, but cooperation feels like two. One thing is cooperating with the other, and the point of this one is that it's not two. It's identity action. We're doing this together. As when we chant together, that's identity action. When we know identity action, Dogen says, self and other are oneness. And he says, the relations between self and others are, depending on the occasion, without limit. The relations between self and others are without limit. When we act from that deepest understanding of our relationality, of our relation to everything, there's nothing left out. It is the deepest truth. Dogen says it this way, that the ocean does not exclude the rivers is identity action. River waters do not exclude the ocean either. I always like to wait and just listen. So imagine those guys are out there, they've got all those clothes on, they've got their regular clothes on, then they've got those uniforms and that hot thing, you know, and they're probably, most of the time when they go out, it's nothing. It's, you know, sometimes they run into really difficulty and they risk their lives, but often it's like nothing, and they have to put on all those heavy clothes and get on those big trucks and go down the street and make a lot of noise. So we have a firehouse right behind us, so I always kind of like feel for those people, the men and women that are in that firehouse. So I'll go back, and I was reading Dogen, and he says that the ocean does not exclude the rivers is identity action. River waters do not exclude the ocean either. This being so, water comes together to form the ocean. It is the ocean, and it is large, and that is why it is large. So the way the ocean receives the rivers is the way we receive the energies of others. Being large, like the ocean, we're not overwhelmed. The ocean is not overwhelmed by the rivers, and we are not overwhelmed by the energies of others. Waters make us spacious. So then Dogen concludes this brilliant metaphor with practice identity action for all people with a gentle expression. He keeps telling us to soften our face, soften our bodies, that it can allow others to flow. This is the way the world changes. So I hope you find in that something that these 4 methods of a Bodhisattva that can help you at this time when we're just becoming aware once again of all the troubles in the world. And you find a way to give freely, and to speak kindly, to offer help, and to act with identity action. Because saving ourselves is the way we serve others. And when we serve others, it saves us. So we're right here near the Hudson River that flows into the great Atlantic. Wave upon wave intermingle, carrying allies and bodhisattvas ready to serve. Enjoy the rest of this hot summer in the city.